Madam Chair, and thank you to our panel. One of the things that strikes me is the difficulty in penciling out a, sustainable, affordable plan for a really aggressive move into space is that in the last 50 years, we've made very little progress in the cost per kilogram of getting stuff into low Earth orbit. If you look at all of the future plans, there's very little that could not be completely understood by Wernher von Braun. That we're up against fundamental physics limits in the specific impulse of chemical rockets. And you mentioned the hypersonic work. There are various ways, reusability. The shuttle was supposed to use reusability to reduce the cost per kilogram into orbit. It did not work. The cost of refurbishing space hardware to space specifications is large. And even the proponents of reusing the booster stage claim less than a factor of 2 cost reduction. And so my question is, when you make long-term plans, how do you split your investment between just sort of using equipment that we know how to build and have known how to build for 50 years, optimizing it somewhat, and investments in fundamental transformative research, things like electromagnetic launch mechanisms, things like air-breathing systems that get most of the energy for low Earth orbit, where you're at least getting the oxidizer from the atmosphere. And how do you split your investments? And are we making a mistake by just doing the same thing over and over and over in terms of getting stuff into orbit? We're now returning to heavy launch vehicles as the cheap way to get stuff into orbit, which was the conclusion back in the 1960s. And so it seems to me that we're underinvesting in the long-term research, particularly in getting past the barrier to getting into low Earth orbit. Anyone who wants to comment on that?
Yeah, this is actually a pet issue of mine, and it was certainly something I tried to work on at NASA. There's always, when you're investing in future technologies, there's always a really difficult trade into, do I put my money towards a flagship that maybe needs money to get off the ground 5 years from now, or am I investing in truly transformative technologies that are going to help us 20, 30 years down the line to do the really bold things that we would like to do? Whenever I go out and talk to elementary schools or junior highs or even high schools, I tell them that they have to go home that night and invent warp drive because of the very issues you just outlined. One of my favorite programs at NASA is called NIAC. It's the NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts, where they do take a relatively small amount of money every year and invest in really far out ideas. I think those technology investments are really critical, and I would urge you as you look at NASA's budget to say, okay, clearly you have to really focus on near-term technologies or we won't get the job in front of us done. But taking some portion of the money and investing in truly transformative technologies, I think, is critically important.
And the nation that comes up with those transformative technologies is going to own space. So it's my opinion that we've been underinvesting in this. You see it in national defense, too. There were problems in the original Star Wars plan, which contemplated thousands of launches to support Star Wars, would have wrecked the upper atmosphere. Okay, and this is another fundamental problem with with chemical rockets, and I really think it's another reason why we have to get past just doing the same thing again and again. Any other comments on that? Okay.
Well, I would just add on, I do think that we need to invest in newer technologies and research, and I think even on the International Space Station, they're planning to put on a new ion propulsion to test.
Right. Which doesn't get you into low Earth orbit. Ion propulsion drives have fantastic
That's true.
specific impulse, but they're useless for getting into low Earth orbit. And related to that, actually, is space nuclear power. There was a recent conference that I got a chance to address at NETS. It's called the Nuclear Engineering and Technology in Space, that was up at PNNL a few weeks ago. And one of the subjects there was the use of space nuclear reactors. There are 2 main uses. One of them is for propulsion. The other one is for power. When you actually go to the moon, go to Mars, it would be nice to have a compact nuclear reactor. And one of the difficulties there is if all of the nations which will be spacefaring, which might be a dozen in our lifetimes, if they all start using high enriched uranium, then we will have many, many nuclear weapons worth of weapons-grade material used in those. And I was wondering what you think about the usefulness of having the U.S. lead the world in developing space-qualified reactor designs with using low-enriched, non-weapons-grade uranium, and really making that the standard for all spacefaring nations. Mr. Rose, is that?
Sir, I don't think I'm competent to talk about that. But I can take it for the record if you'd like.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important issue which we have to face, you know, in the next few years as we define our space reactor R&D program. And I guess my time is up and yield back.
Thank you very